The millionaire's baby refused all food, growing weaker by the hour as panic spread through the mansion. Doctors were helpless, nannies overwhelmed, until the cleaning lady, guided by instinct and compassion, offered him her breast milk. In that moment, the child drank, hope returned, and she saved the day. The fluorescent lights of Cedar-Sinai Hospital hummed their eternal song, a mechanical lullaby that had become the soundtrack of Marcus Wellington's sleepless nights. He stood outside the NICU, his reflection ghost-like in the reinforced glass, watching machines breathe for his son. 5 days. 5 days without a single drop of milk touching those tiny lips. The pediatric team had exhausted their vocabulary of medical possibilities, each specialist leaving behind more questions than answers. His son, barely 3 pounds of fragile humanity, was slipping away with each monitored heartbeat. Marcus pressed his palm against the cool glass. Through the transparent barrier, he could see his wife Elena sitting motionless beside the incubator, her designer clothes wrinkled from days of vigil. She hadn't spoken to him since yesterday's failed consultation. Words had become landmines in their marriage, each conversation threatening to detonate years of unspoken resentments. The construction empire he'd inherited from his father demanded his attention. Board meetings, billion-dollar mergers, stock prices that fluctuated with his every decision. But here, in this sterile corridor, his influence meant nothing. Money couldn't purchase miracles, power couldn't force tiny lungs to accept nourishment. His phone buzzed relentlessly against his chest. Another urgent call from San Francisco, another crisis requiring his immediate intervention. Marcus let it ring until silence returned. He thought about his own father, a man who had built towers that scraped the sky, but never learned to hold his son's hand. Marcus had sworn to be different, yet here he was, failing at the most fundamental responsibility, keeping his child alive. The night shift was changing. Nurses walked past him with practiced invisibility, their soft-soled shoes whispering against polished floors. They spoke in hushed tones about other patients, other families, other tragedies. Marcus had become just another statistic in their endless cycle of human suffering. Dr. Harrison emerged from the NICU, removing his surgical mask with weary precision. "Mr. Wellington, we need to discuss options." The word options hit Marcus like a physical blow. Options meant they were running out of time. Options meant surrender was becoming a medical recommendation. "How long?" Marcus's voice cracked despite his efforts to maintain composure. "We're doing everything possible," Dr. Harrison replied, but his eyes told a different story. They spoke of limitations, of professional helplessness, of miracles that medical science couldn't manufacture. Marcus nodded, understanding that he was drowning in responsibilities he couldn't delegate, carrying failures he couldn't outsource. His empire was crumbling from within, starting with the smallest, most precious foundation stone of all. Elena Wellington sat frozen in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her manicured fingers gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. The steady beep of monitors had replaced her heartbeat, each electronic pulse a reminder of how fragile life could be. She hadn't slept properly in 5 days. Makeup artists couldn't conceal the dark circles under her eyes anymore, and she'd stopped caring. The charity galas, the philanthropic committees, the endless social obligations that once defined her existence, all of it seemed absurd now. Her son lay motionless in the incubator, tubes and wires connecting his tiny body to machines that kept him tethered to this world. She wanted to touch him, to hold him against her chest, but the medical equipment formed an impenetrable barrier between mother and child. The guilt was suffocating. During pregnancy, she continued her rigorous fitness routine, maintained her vegetarian diet, refused even a single glass of wine. She'd done everything right, followed every medical recommendation, yet something had gone wrong. Something inside her had failed to protect the life she was meant to nurture. Marcus entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, his movements mechanical and distant. He offered her one without meeting her eyes. They'd become strangers, sharing the same nightmare, their grief creating walls instead of bridges. "The board is asking questions," Marcus said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "About the Henderson merger. About my absence." Elena felt something sharp twist in her chest. "Your absence? I told them it's a family emergency. They don't understand the details." Family emergency, as if their dying son was merely an inconvenience disrupting quarterly reports. Elena wanted to scream, to throw the coffee against the wall, to make Marcus understand that some things mattered more than stock prices. Instead, she said nothing. Words had become dangerous between them, loaded with accusations neither was ready to voice. A young nurse entered to check the monitors, her movements efficient but gentle. Elena watched the woman's face, searching for any sign of hope, any indication that tomorrow might be different from today. "Has he shown any improvement?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. The nurse's smile was professional but kind. "He's stable. That's what matters right now." Stable. Such a medical word for something so precarious. Elena nodded, accepting the non-answer because truth was too frightening to bear. After the nurse left, Elena found herself staring at Marcus. He'd aged years in these 5 days, his usually perfect appearance showing cracks of vulnerability she hadn't seen since their wedding night. "What if we lose him?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Marcus's jaw tightened. "We won't." But Elena could see the fear in his eyes, the same terror that kept her awake at night. They were powerful people accustomed to controlling their environment, yet here they sat, completely powerless before the mystery of their child's inexplicable condition. The hospital's night shift brought a different rhythm to Cedar-Sinai. Corridors that buzzed with daytime urgency now hummed with quiet efficiency. Emergency lights cast long shadows across polished floors, and the buildings seemed to exhale the day's accumulated tension. Carmen Delgado pushed her cleaning cart down the 7th-floor hallway, her movements automatic after 12 years of identical routes. Mop bucket, disinfectant spray, fresh linens. The ritual of cleaning had become meditation, a way to quiet the grief that still pulsed beneath her ribs like a second heartbeat. 4 months. 4 months since Miguel's accident. 4 months since she'd held her son's hand in another hospital room, watching different machines fail to keep another child alive. The memory lived in her body, in her shoulders that carried invisible weight, in her hands that still reached for phantom embraces. She paused outside the NICU, as she did every night. Through the glass, she could see the wealthy woman in designer clothes, slumped in exhaustion beside an incubator. Carmen recognized the posture of desperate motherhood. The way worry carved lines around a woman's eyes, the protective stance that meant nothing when medicine had no answers. The security guard nodded at Carmen as she entered the restricted area to clean. Jorge had worked nights almost as long as she had. They shared the comfortable silence of people who understood that some jobs required witnessing other people's pain. "The baby still isn't eating," Jorge whispered in Spanish as Carmen arranged her supplies. Carmen's hands stilled on the mop handle. She'd been watching this family's vigil for 5 days, had seen the husband's increasing desperation, the mother's silent breakdown. The tiny form in the incubator reminded her painfully of Miguel at birth, small, fragile, fighting battles too big for such little bodies. "The doctors don't know why," Jorge continued. "Rich family, best care money can buy, but sometimes money doesn't matter." Carmen nodded, understanding more than Jorge realized. She'd learned that tragedy didn't respect social boundaries. Death visited mansions and apartments with equal indifference. As she cleaned around the sleeping mother, Carmen felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not hope. Hope was too dangerous. But recognition, the ache of milk that still came despite having no child to feed, her body's stubborn refusal to accept loss. She'd tried to stop lactating after Miguel's death, had bound her breasts and ignored the painful fullness. But grief had its own logic. Her milk continued to flow like tears that wouldn't dry, a biological monument to love that had nowhere to go. Looking at the struggling infant, Carmen felt Miguel's ghost touch her shoulder. In the intensive care unit's fluorescent twilight, surrounded by machines that breathed for the living, she made a decision that would defy every protocol, every rule, every boundary between her world and theirs. Tomorrow night, she would return with more than cleaning supplies. She would bring the only gift she had left to offer, the one thing her body still produced in abundance, the milk meant for a son who would never taste it again. Carmen's hands trembled as she sterilized the small bottle in her apartment's cramped kitchen. The fluorescent light above the sink flickered, casting unsteady shadows across her movements. What she was planning went against every instinct for self-preservation she'd developed in 12 years of invisible work. She expressed the milk in silence, her body responding to a purpose it had been denied for months. Each drop felt sacred, carrying the weight of impossible hope. Miguel's photograph watched from the refrigerator door, his gap-toothed smile frozen in eternal childhood. "Forgive me, mijo," she whispered to the image. "But maybe your gift can save another mother's heart." The drive to Cedar Sinai felt longer than usual. Carmen kept the bottle hidden in her cleaning supplies, wrapped in sterile cloth she'd taken from the hospital's laundry. Her supervisor's words echoed in her mind. Any violation of protocol means immediate termination. But some risks were worth taking. The 7th floor was quieter than usual when Carmen arrived for her shift. The wealthy mother was still there, now sleeping awkwardly in the chair, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck aching. The father was nowhere to be seen. Carmen moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, waiting for the moment when the hallway would be completely empty. Security made rounds every 45 minutes. Night nurses were busy with emergencies 3 floors down. She had perhaps 10 minutes of solitude. Jorge was helping with a family crisis in pediatric oncology. The NICU stood unguarded. Carmen slipped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sleeping woman stirred, but didn't wake. The baby lay motionless in his transparent prison, monitors displaying numbers that meant nothing to Carmen, but everything to his survival. She approached the incubator with reverence, usually reserved for churches. Up close, the infant was even smaller than she'd imagined. His skin was translucent, blue veins visible beneath paper-thin flesh. Tubes fed into his nose, and IVs disappeared into impossibly tiny veins. "Hola, pequeño," Carmen whispered, placing her palm against the incubator's warm surface. "I know you're tired. I know you're scared." The baby's eyes opened, dark, unfocused, but somehow aware. Carmen felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that transcended logic. In that moment, she saw Miguel in those newborn features, saw her own desperate need to nurture, reflected in the infant's silent struggle. Working with the careful precision of someone who had raised 3 children, Carmen accessed the feeding tube with hands that knew instinctively what to do. The milk flowed slowly, warm with life and thick with antibodies her grief had somehow concentrated. The baby's response was immediate. His tiny chest rose more steadily. The monitors registered subtle improvements, heart rate stabilizing, oxygen levels climbing incrementally. For the first time in days, the child seemed to settle into peaceful rest. Carmen cleaned up quickly, erasing every trace of her intervention. But as she prepared to leave, the sleeping mother stirred, her eyes opening to find Carmen standing beside the incubator. Their gazes met across the divide of language, class, and circumstance. Elena saw only a gentle-faced cleaning woman checking on her son. Carmen saw a mother's desperate love that mirrored her own. Elena opened her eyes to find a woman in cleaning scrubs standing beside her son's incubator. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. The woman's face was kind, weathered by years of hard work, with gentle brown eyes that seemed to understand suffering. "I'm sorry," the woman said softly in accented English. "I didn't mean to wake you. I was just checking." Elena sat up straighter, her neck protesting the hours spent sleeping in the chair. "It's okay. I'm Carmen." "Carmen," Elena repeated, the name feeling warm on her tongue. Did anything change?" Carmen glanced at the monitors, then back at Elena. Something flickered in her expression. Hope, perhaps, or knowledge she couldn't share. "He looks more peaceful tonight." Elena studied her son's face and realized Carmen was right. The tight lines of discomfort that had marked his features for days seemed softer somehow. His breathing appeared less labored, though the machine still did most of the work. "You work here?" Elena asked, surprised by her own desire to continue the conversation. 12 years, Carmen replied, adjusting cleaning supplies she didn't really need to organize. "Night shift." There was something in Carmen's voice, a depth of understanding that came from witnessing countless human dramas in these corridors. Eleanor found herself drawn to this woman's quiet presence, so different from the nervous energy of doctors and nurses who delivered medical updates in carefully measured optimism. "I had a son once," Carmen said unexpectedly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena's breath caught. The past tense hung between them like a prayer and a warning. "I'm sorry," Elena managed, though the words felt inadequate. Carmen nodded, accepting the condolence with dignity. He would have been about 7 now. Car accident. The simple statement carried enormous weight. Elena realized she was sitting in the presence of someone who had walked through the nightmare she was only beginning to imagine. Someone who had lost everything she was fighting to keep. "How do you?" Elena started, then stopped, unsure how to ask how a person survives such devastation. "You don't get over it," Carmen said gently. "You just learn to carry it differently." They sat in comfortable silence, two mothers separated by everything except the most fundamental understanding. Elena watched Carmen's hands as she worked. Capable hands that had clearly held children, soothed fears, wiped away tears. "He's beautiful," Carmen said, looking at the baby with genuine affection. "Strong, too. I can see it in his eyes." Elena felt tears threatening. No one else had commented on her son's strength. Medical staff spoke of his fragility, his complications, his declining stats. But Carmen saw something different. "You think he'll—" Elena couldn't finish the question. Carmen moved closer to the incubator, placing her palm flat against the transparent surface. "Babies are fighters. Sometimes they just need the right help." As if responding to her voice, the infant's tiny hand moved slightly, fingers curling and uncurling in a gesture so perfectly human, it broke Elena's heart with its beauty. "I should go," Carmen said, gathering her supplies. "But I'll see you tomorrow night." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Elena nodded, feeling less alone than she had in days, though she couldn't quite understand why this brief encounter with a hospital cleaner had shifted something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Marcus arrived at the hospital the next morning to find Elena standing beside the incubator, her posture different, straighter, more alert. The night nurse was completing her rounds, a cautious smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Wellington," she said, "your son had a much better night. His vitals improved significantly around 2 a.m. Marcus felt his chest tighten with something he'd been afraid to call hope. "What changed?" "We're not entirely sure. Sometimes babies turn a corner unexpectedly. Dr. Harrison wants to run additional tests this morning." After the nurse left, Marcus studied his wife's face. Elena looked tired but less hollow, as if some terrible weight had shifted slightly off her shoulders. "Tell me," Marcus said quietly. "I met someone last night," Elena began, her voice carrying a new note of certainty. "A cleaning woman, Carmen. She lost her son in an accident." Marcus waited, sensing there was more. "She said babies are fighters. that sometimes they just need the right help. Eleanor touched the incubator gently. Marcus, look at him. Really look. Marcus leaned closer and saw what Elena meant. Their son's color was better, still pale, but no longer the frightening, translucent shade that had haunted his nightmares. The baby's breathing seemed less effortful, and his tiny fingers were moving with purpose rather than random neural firing. The monitors show improvement, Marcus said, reading the displays he'd memorized over the past week. Heart rate stable. Oxygen saturation higher than it's been since birth. Elena nodded. She was here when it started. Carmen, she was just doing her job, cleaning around us. But Elena paused, struggling to articulate something beyond logical explanation. It was like she brought peace with her. Marcus understood his wife's need to find meaning in random medical improvement. But he'd built an empire by trusting data over intuition. Still, looking at his son's peaceful expression, he couldn't deny that something had shifted. Dr. Harrison arrived with his usual clipboard of controlled optimism. After checking the monitors and examining the infant, he turned to them with genuine surprise. "This is remarkable improvement," he admitted. His response to feeding attempts showed significant change overnight. "We're not sure what triggered it, but whatever happened, we need to maintain the current protocol." "What feeding attempts?" Elena asked. "The nurses said he was still rejecting formula." Dr. Harrison frowned at his chart. According to the night staff notes, he took several milliliters around 2 a.m., first successful feeding since admission. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged glances. Neither remembered authorizing any feeding attempts during the night. "Can we see the detailed records?" Marcus asked, his businessman's instincts engaging. "Of course, but right now the important thing is that he's responding. We'll continue monitoring closely, but this is the first real progress we've seen." After the doctor left, Eleanor walked to the window overlooking the hospital's landscaped courtyard. She could see maintenance workers tending to flower beds, their movements purposeful and quiet. "Marcus," she said slowly, "what if the help he needed wasn't medical?" Marcus joined her at the window, understanding dawning in his expression. They'd been so focused on expert opinions and cutting-edge treatments that they'd forgotten to consider other forms of care, the kind that couldn't be purchased or prescribed. "You want to find her," Marcus said. "Carmen." "I want to thank her," Elena replied. "Whatever she did, however she helped, she gave us our son back." Carmen stood in the hospital supply closet, staring at the small bottle in her hands. 3 days of secret feedings had transformed the dying infant into a child who was beginning to thrive. Each night, she watched his improvement with a mixture of joy and terror. The medical staff was baffled. Dr. Harrison had ordered comprehensive tests, searching for explanations that didn't exist in textbooks. Carmen knew she was walking on increasingly dangerous ground. One suspicious nurse, one security camera review, one moment of carelessness could destroy everything. Her sister Rosa burst through the supply room door without knocking, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a double shift at County General. "Carmen, what the hell are you doing?" The bottle slipped from Carmen's hands, milk spattering across the floor like spilled secrets. Rosa's eyes moved from the mess to Carmen's face, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. "Please tell me you're not—" Rosa's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "The baby everyone's talking about. The miracle recovery. Dios mío, Carmen." Carmen bent to clean up the spilled milk, her hands shaking. "He was dying, Rosa." They had no answers. Nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Rosa grabbed Carmen's shoulders, forcing her to stand. "You could go to prison. Medical fraud. Endangering a child. They'll destroy you." "He's not endangered. He's alive." Carmen's voice carried quiet conviction that made Rosa step back. "You don't know what you've done. Rich families like this. They have lawyers, investigators. When they find out some cleaning woman has been feeding their baby," Rosa's voice broke, "they'll crucify you." Carmen resumed cleaning, her movements methodical. "Maybe, but Miguel's milk is saving another mother's son." How is that wrong? Miguel is dead. Rosa's words cut like glass. Your milk won't bring him back, but this madness could take away everything you have left. The harsh truth hung between them. Carmen knew Rosa was right, logically, practically, legally. But logic hadn't guided her actions for months. Grief had its own wisdom, and sometimes healing required breaking rules that made no room for miracles. He recognizes me, Carmen said softly. When I come near his bed, he calms down. When I feed him, he grows stronger. Tell me that's not meant to be. Rosa's expression softened with pity and frustration. What you're feeling isn't supernatural, Carmen. It's trauma. You're trying to save Miguel through this baby. Maybe, Carmen admitted, but saving him is still saving him. And when they catch you, when this fantasy ends, what happens to that baby then? Carmen had no answer. She'd been living day by day, feeding by feeding, watching a child bloom under her secret care, while knowing the foundation was built on lies. There's something else, Rosa continued, her voice gentle but firm. Dr. Martinez at our hospital mentioned something today. There's been talk about a cleaning staff investigation here, budget cuts, performance reviews. Carmen's blood chilled. What kind of investigation? Security wants to review night shift protocols. Someone reported unusual activity in restricted areas. The walls of the supply closet seemed to close in around Carmen. She thought of the baby's improving condition, of Elena's growing hope, of the miracle that was flowering in secret. I have to continue, Carmen whispered, just a little longer, until he's strong enough. Rosa pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. Then we better pray they don't catch you before then? Marcus Wellington stood in his corner office, 30 floors above downtown Los Angeles, staring at reports that should have commanded his complete attention. The Henderson merger, 18 months of negotiations culminating in a deal worth $2.8 billion, required his signature by end of business. But his mind was in a hospital room, watching his son's miraculous recovery that made no medical sense. His phone buzzed with the 5th call from his board chairman in 2 hours. Marcus let it go to voicemail, knowing the message would be the same. Concern about his prolonged absence, questions about his commitment to the company his father had built from nothing. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 30 years, he'd sacrificed everything for Wellington Construction. Marriages, friendships, his own health. Now, when his son needed him most, the empire demanded he choose between legacy and love. Doctor Harrison had called that morning with more inexplicable good news. The baby was gaining weight, responding to stimuli, showing neurological development that defied every earlier prognosis. It's unprecedented, the doctor had said. We're documenting everything for medical journals. Marcus knew his wife was developing an emotional attachment to the night-cleaning woman, Carmen. Elena spoke about her with the reverence usually reserved for surgeons or specialists. Last night, Elena had waited specifically for Carmen's shift, engaging her in careful conversation about the baby's progress. She understands him, Elena had insisted. I can't explain it, but when she's near, he's calmer, more responsive. Marcus had dismissed it as maternal desperation, seeking patterns in coincidence, but this morning, reviewing his son's medical charts, the correlation was undeniable. Every significant improvement had occurred during night shifts when Carmen was present. His secretary knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through 15 years of managing his impossible schedule. Mr. Wellington, the board is threatening to call an emergency meeting. They're questioning your fitness to lead the Henderson negotiations. Marcus turned from the window. My fitness? Your absence? The rumors about family problems. Some members think stress is compromising your judgment. The words hit like physical blows. He'd built this company into an empire that employed thousands, contributed millions to the economy, shaped the skyline of major cities. Now they questioned his competence because he was fighting for his child's life. Schedule the meeting. Marcus said quietly. Tomorrow morning. His secretary looked surprised. Sir, tell them I'll address their concerns directly. And get me everything we have on hospital staffing procedures at Cedar-Sinai. After she left, Marcus returned to the window, watching traffic crawl through the city he'd helped build. His father had taught him that power meant never showing weakness, never allowing personal problems to interfere with business decisions. But his father had never held a dying son, had never watched machines breathe for a child who might never breathe independently. His father had never met a cleaning woman whose presence somehow brought healing that medical science couldn't explain. Marcus pulled up his email and began typing his resignation from the Henderson project. Not from the company, that would come later if necessary, but from the deal that had consumed 18 months of his life. Some things mattered more than mergers. Some miracles were worth protecting, even if it meant choosing people over profit for the first time in his adult life. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. Wellington. Marcus, what the hell is going on? The Henderson team is threatening to walk. Let them, Marcus replied, surprising himself with how easily the words came. Let them. This deal defines our next decade. No, Marcus said, looking toward the hospital that had become the center of his universe. My son defines my next decade. Elena found Carmen in the hospital cafeteria during her break, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she wasn't sleeping well despite working night shifts. Carmen. Elena approached hesitantly, unsure of the protocols for crossing such obvious social boundaries. Carmen looked up with surprise, then stood quickly, the instinctive response of someone accustomed to deferring to authority. Mrs. Wellington, is everything okay with the baby? Please, sit, Eleanor said, gesturing to the chair. And call me Elena. They sat across from each other at the small table, two women separated by everything except their shared concern for a tiny life upstairs. Elena had been raised never to notice service workers, trained to look through them as if they were part of the furniture. But Carmen's presence had become essential to her son's survival, impossible to ignore. I wanted to thank you, Elena began carefully. I know you think I'm imagining things, but his improvement coincides exactly with when you started your shift rotations in the NICU. Carmen's hands tightened around her coffee cup. I just clean, Mrs. Elena. The doctors, they're the ones helping him. But Elena saw something flicker in Carmen's expression. Guilt, perhaps, or knowledge she couldn't share. The same look Marcus got when he was protecting her from difficult business decisions. Tell me about your son, Eleanor said gently. The request seemed to catch Carmen off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained professional distance cracked, revealing raw grief underneath. Miguel was everything, Carmen said finally. Smart, funny. He wanted to be an engineer like his grandfather. She pulled out her phone, showing Elena a photo of a beautiful boy with Carmen's gentle eyes and an infectious grin. He's beautiful, Elena whispered, understanding that she was holding someone's most precious memory. The accident, Carmen's voice broke slightly. Drunk driver. Miguel was walking home from school, just 3 blocks from our apartment. Elena felt tears gathering. Here was a woman who had lost everything, yet continued to show up each night to clean up after other people's tragedies. How do you do it? Eleanor asked. Work here, surrounded by children, after... Carmen was quiet for a long moment. At first, I couldn't. Took 2 months off, but Rosa, my sister, she said grief without purpose becomes poison. Here I can help other mothers. Even if it's just making sure their rooms are clean, their space is peaceful. The words hit Elena with unexpected force. She thought about her own purposeless existence, charity boards where she wrote checks without engagement, social obligations that filled time without meaning. I want to help, Elena said suddenly. Whatever you need, however I can support what you're doing. Carmen's expression grew guarded. "I don't need anything, Elena. I just do my job." But Elena pressed on, driven by instincts she couldn't fully explain. "There's something you're not telling me, about my son's recovery, about why he responds so differently when you're there." Carmen stood abruptly, gathering her things. "I should get back to work." "Carmen, wait." Elena touched her arm gently. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I just want to understand what's helping him." For a moment Carmen seemed to waver, as if deciding whether to trust this wealthy woman with something that could destroy her. Then her professional mask slipped back into place. "Sometimes babies just need to feel safe," Carmen said carefully. "Maybe that's all it is." Elena nodded, accepting the non-answer because she recognized the protective instinct behind it. Whatever Carmen was doing, she was risking everything to help. Elena wasn't sure what that meant, but she knew she wanted to be part of protecting it. Dr. Jonathan Creighton entered the NICU with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent 30 years establishing unshakable protocols. As Cedars-Sinai's chief of pediatrics, he prided himself on running the most efficient department on the West Coast, where miracles were documented, not simply celebrated. The Wellington case troubled him. Inexplicable recoveries belonged in medical journals, not in his carefully managed unit where every improvement should have a traceable cause and replicable methodology. He pulled the detailed charts, studying the timeline of the infant's progress. Each night, between 2 and 4 a.m., the child showed marked improvement, heart rate stabilized, oxygen levels increased, feeding responses strengthened. But the day shift found no corresponding interventions in the medical notes. "Nurse Patterson," he called to the head night nurse, "walk me through the Wellington baby's overnight care." "Routine monitoring, Dr. Creighton. No special interventions beyond the standard protocol. Yet he's gaining weight, responding to stimuli, showing neurological development that defies his initial prognosis." Nurse Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Sometimes babies surprise us. Not this dramatically, not this consistently." Dr. Creighton moved to the incubator, studying the child who was becoming a medical anomaly. "I want security footage reviewed for the past week. Every person who entered this room." "Sir, that seems excessive for a positive outcome." Dr. Creighton's expression hardened. "Mrs. Patterson, unexplained medical events in my department get explained. Period." Meanwhile, Carmen was finishing her morning shift, unaware that her careful routines were being scrutinized. She'd developed a system, expressing milk in the staff restroom, storing it in sterilized containers, waiting for the precise moment when security rounds left the NICU unmonitored. The baby had grown stronger each night, his tiny fingers now grasping reflexively when she touched the incubator. Carmen allowed herself to believe that Miguel's spirit was flowing through her milk, giving another child the life her son couldn't finish. Elena arrived early that evening, finding Carmen preparing to begin her cleaning routine. They'd developed an unspoken understanding. Elena would create conversation to provide cover while Carmen worked, both women protecting something neither fully acknowledged. "He's been more alert today," Elena said, settling into her familiar chair. "The nurses say his muscle tone is improving." Carmen nodded, arranging supplies with practiced efficiency. She'd noticed the changes too, the way the baby tracked movement with his eyes, how he seemed to anticipate feeding times. "Mrs. Wellington," Carmen said carefully, "has anyone asked questions about his improvement? Doctors, maybe?" Elena looked up sharply. "What kind of questions?" "Just wondering if they found medical reasons." The concern in Carmen's voice made Elena study her more carefully. "Carmen, is there something you need to tell me?" Before Carmen could respond, Dr. Creighton appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately shifting the room's atmosphere. "Mrs. Wellington," he said with professional courtesy, "I'm Dr. Creighton, Department Chief. I wanted to discuss your son's remarkable progress." Elena felt Carmen tense beside her, though the woman continued her work with determinedly steady hands. "Of course, Doctor. We're grateful for the improvement. As are we. However, I'm implementing additional monitoring protocols to better understand what's contributing to his recovery. Dr. Creighton's eyes moved briefly to Carmen, then back to Elena. We want to ensure we can replicate these results for other patients. The words sounded reasonable, but Elena heard the underlying message. Someone was asking uncomfortable questions about inexplicable healing. After Dr. Creighton left, Carmen continued cleaning with mechanical precision, but Elena could see her hands shaking slightly. "Carmen," Elena said quietly, "whatever you've been doing to help my son, I want you to know that you have my complete support." Carmen stopped working, meeting Elena's eyes directly. For the first time, their interaction carried the weight of mutual understanding and shared risk. Marcus stood in the hospital administrator's office, his lawyer beside him, facing a conversation he never imagined having. Dr. Richardson, the chief administrator, spread security footage stills across his mahogany desk with the careful precision of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mr. Wellington, we need to discuss some irregularities in your son's care." Marcus studied the grainy images, Carmen entering the NICU during her cleaning rounds, moments captured by cameras he hadn't known existed. In one frame, she was clearly accessing the feeding apparatus. "This woman," Dr. Richardson continued, "Carmen Delgado, has been providing unauthorized nutrition to your infant. We believe she's been breastfeeding him using expressed milk." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His lawyer immediately began discussing liability, legal exposure, potential lawsuits. But Marcus found himself thinking about his son's inexplicable recovery, about Elena's insistence that Carmen brought healing. "What are the medical implications?" Marcus asked. Dr. Richardson looked surprised by the question. "Unknown pathogens, unscreened substances. Complete violation of sterile protocols. We've immediately suspended Ms. Delgado and are conducting full medical evaluations of your son." "I want to see her," Marcus said quietly. "Sir, I strongly advise against any contact. Our legal department recommends—" "I want to see her," Marcus repeated, with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Carmen sat in the hospital's security office, still wearing her cleaning uniform, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Marcus had imagined. When he entered, she stood immediately, the instinctive deference of someone who understood power dynamics. "Mr. Wellington, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt your son." Marcus studied her face, lined with worry and exhaustion, but carrying a dignity that couldn't be diminished by circumstances. This was the woman who had saved his child's life while risking her own livelihood. "Tell me why," he said simply. Carmen's composure cracked. "My son died 4 months ago. Car accident. I still had milk, still needed—" She pressed her hand to her chest. "When I saw your baby dying, saw his mother's pain, I couldn't just watch. I had milk that could help, that might save him. Without permission, without medical supervision." "Yes," Carmen met his eyes directly. "I broke rules, but your son was dying, and now he lives. I would do it again." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of moral courage that transcended legal boundaries. This woman had risked everything to give his family what money couldn't buy: hope. "The hospital wants to press charges," Marcus said. Carmen nodded, accepting what she'd always known was possible. "I understand. They also want to run comprehensive medical tests on my son, looking for any negative effects from your intervention." "That's good," Carmen said. "You should know he's safe." Marcus made a decision that would have horrified his board of directors. "Carmen, I want to hire you." "Sir?" "Not as a cleaner, as my son's caregiver. Full salary, benefits, legal protection, whatever you've been giving him, he needs to continue receiving it." Carmen stared at him in shock. "Mr. Wellington, I don't understand." "My son was dying. Medical science had no answers. You found a way to save him." Marcus leaned forward. "I've spent my career believing that systems and protocols solve problems. But sometimes the solution comes from someone willing to break rules for the right reasons. The hospital will never allow. The hospital doesn't get to decide, Marcus interrupted. I'm taking my son home with proper medical supervision, but with you as his primary caregiver. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept charity, Mr. Wellington. This isn't charity, Marcus replied. This is business. You have something my son needs, and I'm willing to pay whatever it costs to make sure he gets it. For the first time since Miguel's death, Carmen allowed herself to believe that purpose could emerge from grief, that broken rules sometimes led to healing. Elena walked through the empty rooms of her Malibu mansion, her footsteps echoing in spaces designed for entertaining hundreds, but inhabited by 3 souls, learning to become a family. 6 weeks had passed since bringing the baby home, and the house had transformed from a showcase into something resembling a home. Carmen lived in the guest wing, a space larger than any apartment she'd ever inhabited. Initially, she'd felt like an intruder in this world of marble countertops and ocean views. But gradually, the baby's needs had reorganized the entire household around rhythms of feeding, sleeping, and quiet celebration of each developmental milestone. Marcus had shocked everyone, including himself, by taking an extended leave from Wellington Construction. Board meetings now happened via video conference from his home office, while his son slept in a bassinet nearby. The merger deals could wait. This miracle required his complete attention. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric specialist they'd hired for home care, emerged from the nursery with her daily report. The genetic testing had revealed the infant's extraordinary condition, a rare metabolic disorder that made him unable to process standard formulas, combined with an immune system that specifically responded to Carmen's unique antibody profile. It's medically fascinating, Dr. Chen had explained. Carmen's milk contains exactly the enzyme compounds his system needs. We're documenting everything for future research. Elena found Carmen in the garden, sitting on a bench overlooking the Pacific, the baby contentedly nursing while seagulls circled overhead. The scene was so peaceful it took Elena's breath away. This woman who had lost everything, giving life to the child who had been slipping away. How is he today? Elena asked, settling beside them on the bench. Strong, Carmen replied, her voice soft with wonder. He smiled yesterday. A real smile, not just gas. Elena watched her son's tiny hand grip Carmen's finger with surprising strength. The baby had tripled his birth weight, his eyes now focusing with the alert intelligence Dr. Chen called exceptional neural development. Carmen, Elena said carefully, I need to ask you something difficult. Carmen looked up, immediately alert to potential problems. Are you happy here? Really happy? Not just grateful, but truly content. Carmen considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I miss my old life sometimes. My sister, my neighborhood, feeling useful in a way I understood. She looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep against her chest. But here, I feel like Miguel's love is still flowing through me, like his death wasn't the end of everything. Elena nodded, understanding more than Carmen realized. I've been thinking about purpose. Before this happened, I wrote checks to charities, but never saw where the money went. I attended galas, but never met the people we were supposedly helping. You have a good heart, Carmen said. Just needed the right place to use it. That's what I want to talk about. Marcus and I have been discussing setting up a foundation. Research into maternal-infant immunology, support for mothers who've experienced loss, programs to train medical staff about alternative care approaches. Carmen's eyes widened. That sounds wonderful. We want you to help run it, not as an employee, but as a partner. Your experience, your insights, your story, they're what could make the difference for other families. The offer hung between them, enormous in its implications. Carmen had gone from invisible cleaning woman to essential caregiver to potential advocate for revolutionary change in maternal care. I don't know anything about running foundations, Carmen protested. Neither did I before this, Elena admitted. But you know things we never learned, about grief, about healing, about love that finds a way even when logic says it's impossible. The baby stirred in Carmen's arms, making the small sounds that meant he was ready for another feeding. As Carmen adjusted him naturally, Elena marveled at how maternal instinct had created bonds that transcended every boundary society had constructed between them. Think about it, Elena said, but know that whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here, with us. As family. Carmen's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they were tears of hope rather than grief. The first meeting of the Wellington Foundation for Maternal Care took place in Elena's living room, transformed from a space of rigid formality into something resembling a warm gathering of purposeful friends. Carmen sat at the head of the conference table, still adjusting to being treated as an expert rather than invisible help. Dr. Chen presented their preliminary research findings to a small group of pediatricians, lactation specialists, and maternal health advocates. The baby, now 4 months old and thriving, slept peacefully in Carmen's arms, living proof of the theories they were developing. The immunological compatibility Carmen demonstrated appears to be more common than we initially believed, Dr. Chen explained. We've identified 12 other cases worldwide where grieving mothers with similar antibody profiles could potentially help infants with metabolic disorders. Marcus leaned forward from his position beside Elena. 6 months ago, he would have been in a boardroom discussing profit margins. Now, he found himself asking questions about milk bank protocols and maternal support systems. What are the legal barriers, he asked. Significant, admitted Dr. C. Patricia Reeves, the medical ethics specialist they'd consulted. Current regulations don't account for targeted biological compatibility. Most institutions would view Carmen's intervention as dangerous improvisation rather than medical innovation. Carmen spoke up quietly. But it works. We have proof it works. The room fell silent, acknowledging the simple truth that challenged complex bureaucracies. Elena watched the faces around the table, educated professionals being taught by a woman whose only credentials were grief transformed into healing. That's why we need systemic change, Elena said. Research funding, protocol development, advocacy for mothers who fall outside traditional support systems. Rosa, Carmen's sister, attended as the Foundation's first beneficiary. She'd quit her job at County General to pursue specialized training in maternal infant care, funded by the Wellington Foundation's education program. Carmen's situation isn't unique, Rosa explained. I've met dozens of mothers who lost children but continued lactating. Most suffer in silence, ashamed of their body's refusal to accept loss. What if that grief could become healing for other families? The baby stirred, and Carmen began the gentle rocking motion that had become second nature. Elena marveled at how naturally maternal instinct had reorganized all their lives around this small person's needs. Dr. Chen pulled up charts on her laptop. Our preliminary screening has identified 3 mothers in Los Angeles alone who could help infants currently failing to thrive in area hospitals. How do we approach them? Marcus asked. Carefully, Carmen interjected. Grief makes you vulnerable. Trust comes slowly. Elena nodded, remembering her first tentative conversations with Carmen in the hospital cafeteria. We need peer counselors. Mothers who've walked this path, who can speak to the others with authentic understanding. The meeting continued for 2 hours, mapping out research protocols, support systems, and advocacy strategies. But Elena found herself most moved by quiet moments. Carmen's unconscious humming as the baby settled, Marcus taking notes with the focused attention he once reserved for billion-dollar deals. Rosa's transformation from skeptical sister to fierce advocate. As the group prepared to leave, Dr. Chen approached Carmen privately. I have a question that's not entirely medical. Carmen waited. Do you think Miguel would be proud of what you're doing? Carmen was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the sleeping infant who had given her grief a purpose. I think he would understand that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new ways to flow. Elena overheard the exchange from across the room and felt something settle in her chest. The recognition that they were building something larger than a foundation. They were creating a community where loss could transform into legacy, where the invisible could become essential, where breaking rules sometimes led to healing that policies couldn't provide. The baby opened his eyes, looking up at Carmen with the focused attention that still amazed his parents. In his gaze, Elena saw not just her son, but the future, a world where maternal wisdom would be valued alongside medical expertise, where grief could become a bridge to hope. 1 year later, Carmen stood before a gathering of medical professionals at UCLA, holding a microphone, with hands that no longer trembled when speaking to authority. The auditorium was filled with doctors, researchers, and policymakers who had come to hear about the Wellington Protocol, a revolutionary approach to maternal-infant care born from grief and nurtured by courage. 15 months ago, I was invisible, Carmen began, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had developed through months of telling her story. A cleaning woman who worked nights, grieved silently, and believed my voice didn't matter. In the front row, Elena held her son, now a robust toddler, who bore no resemblance to the failing infant he'd once been. Marcus sat beside them, his business suit replaced by the casual clothes of a man who had learned to prioritize presence over profit. Today, the Wellington Foundation has facilitated matches between 12 grieving mothers and infants whose medical needs align with their biological gifts, Carmen continued. We've saved lives, but more importantly, we've transformed how the medical community thinks about maternal wisdom. Doctor, Chen stepped to the second podium, presenting research data that had captured international attention. The Wellington Protocol demonstrates that targeted maternal-infant biological compatibility can achieve outcomes that traditional medicine couldn't provide. We're not replacing medical expertise. We're expanding it to include maternal intuition as a legitimate therapeutic resource. The audience listened with the respectful attention Carmen had never imagined receiving. She thought of Miguel, wondering if he could see how his short life had become the foundation for healing that reached far beyond their small apartment in East LA. After the presentation, Carmen found herself surrounded by medical professionals asking detailed questions about implementation protocols, screening procedures, and ethical frameworks. She answered with the authority of someone who had lived the experience rather than studied it. Elena approached as the crowd thinned. Ready to go home? Home. The word still felt miraculous to Carmen, not the mansion in Malibu that had never felt like home despite its beauty. Home was the small house they'd purchased together in Santa Monica, where Carmen maintained her independence while remaining close enough to provide ongoing care for the baby who had taught them all about unconventional family. As they walked to the parking lot, Elena's son toddled between them, his chubby hands gripping theirs with the confident trust of a child who had never known scarcity of love. He babbled constantly now, combining English and Spanish words he'd absorbed from both his mothers. "Mama Carmen," he said, tugging on her skirt. "Up!" Carmen lifted him easily, marveling at his solid weight. The fragile infant who had refused to eat was now a sturdy toddler who approached life with fearless curiosity. The foundation received 3 new applications today, Elena said as they reached the car. 2 from Colorado, 1 from Texas. Word is spreading, Carmen nodded, buckling the toddler into his car seat. Each new case brought the same mixture of hope and responsibility. Other mothers, other children, other chances to prove that healing sometimes came from unexpected sources. And Dr. Patterson called from Cedars-Sinai, Elena added. They want to implement our screening protocol in their NICU. The irony wasn't lost on Carmen. The same hospital that had suspended her for protocol violations now wanted to learn from her innovations. Progress sometimes required breaking rules before new ones could be written. As they drove home along the Pacific Coast Highway, Carmen watched the ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Miguel's photograph sat on her dashboard, his smile now a source of joy rather than unbearable grief. The baby in the back seat had fallen asleep to Carmen's quiet humming, the same lullabies she'd once sung to Miguel. But these songs no longer carried only sadness. They carried hope, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that love finds ways to continue flowing, even after devastating loss. Elena reached over and squeezed Carmen's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Carmen squeezed back, understanding that gratitude flowed in both directions. This family had given her purpose when grief threatened to consume her entirely. They had seen value in her pain and helped transform it into healing for others. The sun was setting over Malibu as they pulled into their driveway, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Carmen lifted the sleeping toddler from his car seat, feeling his warm weight against her chest, solid proof that miracles could emerge from the deepest sorrow when love refused to surrender. In that moment, she knew Miguel would be proud. His brief life had become the seed for lasting change, his mother's milk, the bridge between loss and hope. Some gifts, Carmen realized, become more powerful after they've been broken and rebuilt with purpose.